Hey guys, welcome to Neighbor Stories with JusRead. Today we're diving into some incredible stories about overcoming the toughest neighbor disputes, homeowner association dramas, and dealing with entitled people. Our story is titled, I Built a 10-Foot Tall Fence to Save My Neighbor's Garden from HOA Bullies. The story starts like this. When I first moved into Sunnyside Estates, I thought I'd found the perfect neighborhood. The lawns were manicured, the houses well-maintained, and there was a sense of community that I hadn't experienced in my previous apartments. Little did I know that beneath this picturesque facade lurked a tyrannical homeowners association that would soon make my life a living hell. My name's Mike, and I'm a 35-year-old software engineer. I've been saving for years to buy my first home, and when I saw the for sale sign in front of 1234 Maple Street, I knew it was meant to be. The previous owners, an elderly couple, had kept the place in immaculate condition. The backyard was spacious, perfect for the barbecues I'd always dreamed of hosting. On moving day, I met my next-door neighbor, Sarah. She was in her late 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes that crinkled when she smiled. "Welcome to the neighborhood, dear," she said, offering me a plate of homemade cookies. "I hope you'll enjoy living here as much as I have for the past 30 years. As we chatted, I couldn't help but notice Sarah's beautiful garden. It stretched across her entire backyard, a riot of colors and scents. Roses climbed trellises, tomato plants stood tall and proud, and a small herb garden released aromatic fragrances into the air. "Your garden is amazing," I said, genuinely impressed. Sarah beamed with pride. "Thank you, Mike. It's been my passion project since my husband passed away. Gardening keeps me connected to him, you know? He always loved fresh vegetables." I nodded, touched by her words. "Well, it's truly something special. I hope I can create even half as beautiful a space in my yard someday." Little did I know that Sarah's garden, this oasis of beauty and memory, would soon become the center of a neighborhood war. The trouble started about a month after I moved in. I was just getting settled into my new routine when I received my first letter from the homeowner association. It was a generic welcome message, outlining the various rules and regulations of Sunnyside Estates. Most of it seemed standard. Keep your lawn mowed, don't paint your house, neon colors, that sort of thing. But as I read further, I started to feel a creeping sense of unease. The letter was signed by Cynthia Blackwood, homeowner association president. Her name would soon become synonymous with petty tyranny in my mind. A few days later, I was out front, chatting with Sarah as she watered her rose bushes, when a sleek black SUV pulled up. Out stepped a woman who looked like she'd just walked off the set of a Real Housewives show. Her blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, her nails manicured to sharp points, and her face set in a permanent expression of disdain. "That's Cynthia," Sarah whispered to me, homeowner association president. "Watch yourself around her." Cynthia marched up to us, her high heels clicking on the sidewalk. "Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I see you still haven't addressed the issue with your backyard." Sarah's friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a look of tired resignation. "Cynthia, we've been over this. My garden doesn't violate any homeowner association rules." "It's an eyesore," Cynthia snapped. "The board has received complaints. You have 2 weeks to remove those unsightly vegetable plants and replace them with proper landscaping, or you'll be fined." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sarah's garden? An eyesore? It was the most beautiful yard in the neighborhood. "Excuse me," I interjected, "but what exactly is the problem with Sarah's garden?" Cynthia turned her icy gaze on me. "Ah, you must be the new resident. Mike, was it? Well, Mike, here at Sunnyside Estates, we have standards to maintain. Vegetable gardens belong on farms, not in respectable suburban neighborhoods." I felt my blood begin to boil. "That's ridiculous. Sarah's garden is gorgeous, and it's on her own property. How can you dictate what she grows in her backyard?" Cynthia's eyes narrowed. "I'd be careful if I were you, Mike. You're new here, and you don't want to start off on the wrong foot with the homeowner association. We have rules for a reason, to maintain property values and the aesthetic appeal of our community. If you can't understand that, perhaps Sunnyside Estates isn't the right place for you." With that, she spun on her heel and marched back to her SUV, leaving Sarah and me standing in stunned silence. "I'm so sorry you had to see that," Sarah said quietly. "Cynthia's been trying to get rid of my garden for years. I've managed to hold her off so far, but I'm getting tired, Mike. I don't know how much longer I can fight." I looked at Sarah, this kind woman who had welcomed me so warmly, and felt a surge of protective anger. "Don't worry, Sarah. We'll figure something out. I won't let them destroy your garden." Little did I know that those words would set me on a collision course with the homeowner association, leading to a battle that would consume the next several months of my life. Over the next few weeks, I did some digging. I read through the homeowner association bylaws, spoke with other neighbors, and even consulted a lawyer friend. What I discovered was infuriating. There was nothing in the homeowner association rules that explicitly prohibited vegetable gardens. Cynthia and her cronies were interpreting vague language about maintaining the aesthetic character of the neighborhood to suit their own preferences. But Sarah wasn't the only victim. I learned that the homeowner association had been bullying other residents too. The Johnsons down the street had been fined for having a basketball hoop in their driveway. Mrs. Lee, a widow in her 80s, had received nasty letters about her bird feeders attracting vermin. It seemed that Cynthia and her board were on a power trip, using the homeowner association as their personal fiefdom. I decided it was time to take action. I called a meeting with Sarah and a few other neighbors who had been targeted by the homeowner association. We gathered in my living room one evening, sharing stories and brainstorming ideas. "What if we all just refused to pay their fines?" suggested Tom, a burly construction worker who lived across the street. "They could put liens on our properties," Mrs. Lee said quietly. "I can't risk losing my home. It's all I have left of my Herald." I nodded. "We need to find a way to work within their rules, but also stand up to their bullying." That's when the idea hit me. I turned to Sarah. "The homeowner association can't dictate what you grow in your yard if they can't see it, right?" Sarah looked confused. "What do you mean?" A slow grin spread across my face. "What if we built a fence? A really tall fence? They can't complain about what they can't see." The room erupted in excited chatter. We spent the next few hours planning our strategy. By the end of the night, Operation Garden Shield was born. The next day, I submitted a request to the homeowner association to build a fence on my property. I made sure to follow every rule to the letter: height restrictions, approved materials, the works. To my surprise, the request was approved within a week. Cynthia probably thought she was punishing me by making me spend money on a fence. Little did she know, this was just phase 1 of our plan. As soon as the approval came through, I got to work. I hired Tom's construction company to build the fence, ensuring everything was up to code. We built it right up to the maximum allowed height of 6 feet. From the street, it looked like any other nice wooden fence. But on the inside, facing Sarah's yard, we added another 4 feet of latticework. It was technically a trellis, not part of the fence structure, so it didn't violate any height restrictions. We painted it a soft green to blend in with Sarah's plants. The result was a 10-foot barrier that completely shielded Sarah's garden from view. From the street or Cynthia's precious homeowner association inspection tours, all you could see was a tasteful wooden fence. But on our side, Sarah's garden was free to flourish. As we put the finishing touches on the fence, I could see the relief and joy on Sarah's face. Her garden was safe, at least for now, but I knew Cynthia wouldn't give up that easily. Sure enough, the very next day after we completed the fence, I received another letter from the homeowner association. This one was personally signed by Cynthia, demanding an immediate inspection of my backyard and Sarah's. I called Sarah to warn her, and we quickly put phase 2 of our plan into action. We invited some of the other neighbors over, and together, we created a beautiful English cottage-style garden in my backyard. We planted flowers, installed a small fountain, and even added some tasteful garden ornaments. It was picture-perfect and completely in line with the homeowner association's precious aesthetic standards. When Cynthia arrived for the inspection, her face was a mask of barely contained rage. She stalked around my yard, desperately looking for something to criticize, but found nothing. The fence was up to code, and my new garden was impeccable. "I need to inspect the other side of the fence," she finally snapped. I put on my most innocent expression. "I'm sorry, but that's my neighbor's private property. You'll need to ask her permission." Cynthia's eyes narrowed. Fine, I'll do that right now." We walked next door, where Sarah was waiting on her porch. The exchange that followed was one I'll never forget. "Sarah," Cynthia said, her voice sickly sweet, "I need to inspect your backyard." Sarah smiled serenely. "Of course, Cynthia, but I'm afraid I'll have to decline. As you can see, Mike's new fence blocks any view into my yard from the street or neighboring properties. Since there's no way for my yard to affect the neighborhood's aesthetics, there's no need for an inspection." Cynthia's face turned an alarming shade of red. "That's not how this works. I am the homeowner association president, and I have the right to inspect any property at any time." "Actually," I chimed in, "according to the bylaws, inspections are only allowed for visible areas that might affect property values. Since Sarah's backyard is no longer visible from any public or common areas, it's not subject to inspection." Cynthia looked like she was about to explode. This is unacceptable. I'll be bringing this up at the next board meeting. You haven't heard the last of this." As she stormed off, Sarah and I exchanged a triumphant glance. Round 1 had gone to us, but we knew the war was far from over. Over the next few weeks, Cynthia tried everything she could to find a loophole in our fence strategy. She sent more letters, threatened fines, and even tried to claim that the lattice on top of the fence violated height restrictions. But we had done our homework. Everything was within the rules, and she knew it. Meanwhile, word of our stand against the homeowner association spread through the neighborhood. More and more people started coming to us with their stories of homeowner association bullying. We began holding regular meetings in my living room, offering advice and support to our neighbors. Tom and his wife Lisa were fighting a battle over their kids' treehouse. The Patels 2 streets over were being harassed about their holiday decorations. Even Mr. Johnson, a retired lawyer, had received citations for his classic car parked in his own driveway. As we shared our experiences, a pattern emerged. Cynthia and her board weren't just strict rule enforcers, they were actively targeting certain residents. Anyone who didn't fit their narrow vision of a perfect neighborhood was subjected to constant harassment and frivolous fines. It was time to take our resistance to the next level. With Mr. Johnson's legal expertise, we began combing through years of homeowner association records. We filed official requests for financial statements, board meeting minutes, and records of all complaints and citations issued. At first, the board tried to stonewall us, but we knew our rights. We threatened legal action if they didn't comply with state laws regarding homeowner association transparency. What we uncovered was shocking. There were discrepancies in the financial records, suggesting misuse of homeowner association funds. Board meeting minutes showed clear bias in enforcement, with Cynthia's friends and allies receiving preferential treatment. And the complaint records revealed a pattern of targeting certain homeowners while ignoring violations by board members and their friends. Armed with this information, we called for an emergency homeowner association meeting. The turnout was unprecedented. Nearly every homeowner in Sunnyside Estates showed up, packing the community center to the brim. Cynthia tried to control the meeting, but the atmosphere was electric with pent-up frustration and anger. One by one, residents stood up to share their stories of homeowner association abuse. Sarah bravely recounted years of harassment over her beloved garden. The Patels spoke about feeling discriminated against because of their cultural celebrations. Mr. Johnson presented our findings, laying out a clear case of mismanagement and selective enforcement. As the meeting progressed, Cynthia's face grew paler and paler. Her usual supporters were oddly silent, perhaps realizing for the first time just how many of their neighbors had been hurt by their actions. Finally, I stood up to address the room. "Neighbors, friends," I began, "what we've seen here today is clear evidence that our current homeowner association leadership has lost sight of what truly matters in a community. They've prioritized their personal preferences over our collective well-being. They've used their power to bully and harass rather than to support and uplift." I paused, looking around the room. But it doesn't have to be this way. Homeowner associations can be a force for good when run properly. They can help maintain our property values, organize community events, and mediate disputes fairly. What we need is new leadership. Leadership that respects every resident's right to enjoy their own property, that enforces rules equally and transparently, and that puts the community's needs first. The room erupted in applause. Calls for an immediate vote to recall the current board and elect new leadership rang out. Cynthia tried to object, citing procedural rules, but she was drowned out by the crowd's demands. In the end, we held an impromptu election right there and then. Sarah, to everyone's delight, was nominated and elected as the new homeowner association president. Mr. Johnson became our legal advisor, and other respected community members filled out the rest of the board. As the meeting adjourned, there was a palpable sense of relief and hope in the air. People were smiling, shaking hands, making plans to get to know their neighbors better. It felt like the community's Sunnyside Estates had always promised to be but never quite achieved under Cynthia's reign. In the weeks that followed, we saw immediate changes. The new board's first act was to review and revise the homeowner association rules, removing vague language that had allowed for abuse and clarifying enforcement procedures. They set up a fair appeals process for citations and fines, and established regular town hall meetings to hear residents' concerns. Sarah's garden, of course, was officially approved and even celebrated. The board organized a community garden tour, showcasing not just Sarah's beautiful space, but other unique and personal gardens throughout the neighborhood. It was a huge success, bringing neighbors together and fostering a new appreciation for individual expression within our community. As for me, I kept my tall fence, but now, instead of being a barrier, it became a symbol of our neighborhood's transformation. Sarah and I worked together to plant climbing roses and jasmine along its length, creating a beautiful, fragrant wall that everyone could enjoy. Cynthia and her closest allies eventually moved away, unable to adapt to the new, more inclusive atmosphere of Sunnyside Estates. But most residents, even those who had initially supported the old regime, came around once they saw how much better life could be in a truly collaborative community. Looking back now, a year after that fateful homeowner association meeting, I'm amazed at how much has changed. Our neighborhood is thriving. Property values are up, not because of stringent rules, but because people genuinely want to live here. We have regular community events, from summer barbecues to holiday celebrations that embrace all cultures. And Sarah? Her garden is more beautiful than ever. She started teaching gardening classes for interested neighbors, passing on her knowledge and passion to a new generation. The vegetable patch has expanded into a small community garden, providing fresh produce for local food banks. As for me, I've found a sense of belonging I never expected when I first moved in. I've made lifelong friends, learned the value of standing up for what's right, and discovered that sometimes, the best way to break down walls is to build the right kind of fence. The 10-foot fence still stands in my backyard, a reminder of where we started and how far we've come. It's covered in blooming vines now, a living testament to the power of community, perseverance, and the simple act of helping a neighbor in need. In the end, we didn't just save Sarah's garden, we saved our entire community. But the story doesn't end there. Our success at Sunnyside Estates had far-reaching consequences that none of us could have anticipated. About 6 months after our homeowner association revolution, I received a call from a woman named Rachel. She lived in Oak Grove, a neighborhood about 20 miles away, and had heard about what we'd done at Sunnyside Estates. "We're dealing with a similar situation here," Rachel explained, her voice tense with frustration. "Our homeowner association board is out of control. They're fining people for ridiculous things, like having a butterfly garden or painting their front door the wrong shade of beige. We're at our wits' end." I listened as Rachel described a situation eerily similar to what we had faced. Their homeowner association president, a man named Gerald, seemed cut from the same cloth as Cynthia, power-hungry, inflexible, and more concerned with his vision of perfection than the well-being of his neighbors. "Can you help us?" Rachel asked. "We don't know where to start." I hesitated for a moment. Our fight against Cynthia had been exhausting, and part of me wanted to simply enjoy the peace we'd achieved. But I remembered how hopeless I'd felt before we started, how close Sarah had been to giving up her beloved garden. I couldn't turn my back on people facing the same struggle. "Of course," I said. "Let me talk to Sarah and the others. We'll figure out a way to help." Over the next few weeks, our core group from Sunnyside Estates, Sarah, Mr. Johnson, Tom, and I, met with Rachel and a few other Oak Grove residents. We shared our experiences, offered advice on navigating homeowner association bylaws, and helped them develop a strategy to reclaim their neighborhood. As word spread, more communities reached out to us. It seemed that overbearing homeowner associations were a common problem, and people were desperate for solutions. Before we knew it, we had inadvertently started a movement. We called it the Community First Coalition. Our mission was simple: to help homeowners transform toxic homeowner associations into positive forces for community building. We created a website with resources, sample bylaws, and step-by-step guides for organizing neighborhood resistance. We offered virtual consultations, and even traveled to particularly troubled communities to provide in-person support. It wasn't always easy. Some homeowner association boards fought back hard, using their financial resources and legal connections to try and silence dissent. But we had learned from our experience with Cynthia. We knew how to work within the rules while building grassroots support. And most importantly, we knew the power of bringing neighbors together for a common cause. One of our most challenging cases was in a luxury gated community called Evergreen Estates. The homeowner association there was led by a former corporate lawyer named Richard, who ruled with an iron fist. He had managed to amend the community's bylaws to give the board unprecedented power, including the ability to levy enormous fines, and even initiate foreclosure proceedings for rule violations. When we arrived at Evergreen Estates, the atmosphere was tense. Many residents were afraid to speak out, fearing retaliation from Richard and his board. It took weeks of quiet one-on-one conversations to build trust and create a network of homeowners willing to stand up to the homeowner association. Our breakthrough came when we discovered that Richard had been using homeowner association funds to make improvements to his own property, including installing a lavish backyard pool that violated the very rules he enforced on others. With the help of a whistleblower on the homeowner association staff, we obtained financial records proving the misuse of funds. Armed with this information, we organized a community meeting. The turnout was massive, with even Richard's former supporters showing up to hear the evidence. When confronted with proof of his corruption, Richard tried to bluster his way out, threatening lawsuits against anyone who challenged him. But the tide had turned. One by one, homeowners stood up to share their stories of intimidation and unfair treatment. The emotion in the room was palpable as people finally felt free to speak their truth. The meeting ended with a unanimous vote to recall Richard and the entire board. In their place, a diverse group of residents was elected, including young families, retirees, and people of various cultural backgrounds. The new board's first act was to reverse Richard's draconian rule changes and establish a community review process for all major decisions. The transformation at Evergreen Estates was remarkable. Within months, the once silent streets were alive with block parties, children playing, and neighbors chatting over fence lines. Property values, which had stagnated under Richard's regime, began to rise as word spread about the positive changes in the community. As our movement grew, we started to attract attention from local media and even some state legislators. We were invited to speak at town halls and community meetings across the state. Sarah, with her quiet strength and passion for bringing people together, became an unexpected spokesperson for our cause. One day, as we were driving back from a particularly successful community meeting, Sarah turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Mike," she said, "when you first built that big fence to protect my garden, I never imagined it would lead to all this." I chuckled. "Me neither. I just wanted to stick it to Cynthia and save your tomatoes." Sarah smiled, but her eyes were serious. "We've done so much more than that. We're helping people reclaim their homes, their neighborhoods. We're showing them that they have the power to create the communities they want to live in." She was right. What had started as a simple act of neighborly kindness had grown into something much bigger. We were changing lives, one homeowner association at a time. As our work continued, we faced new challenges. Some developers and real estate companies, seeing homeowner associations as a way to maintain control over communities long after homes were sold, began to push back against our efforts. They lobbied state legislators, trying to pass laws that would make it harder for homeowners to challenge homeowner association boards. But we had built a strong network of supporters. When these bills came up for debate, we mobilized. Hundreds of homeowners from communities we had helped showed up at the state capitol, sharing their stories of homeowner association abuse and the positive changes they'd seen in their neighborhoods. The turning point came when Sarah testified before the state legislature. She spoke about her garden, about the years of harassment she'd endured, and about the vibrant community that had blossomed once neighbors started working together instead of against each other. A homeowner association should be a tool for building community, not a weapon for enforcing conformity, she said, her voice strong and clear. When we empower homeowners to have a real say in how their neighborhoods are run, we create stronger, happier, more valuable communities for everyone. Her words resonated not just with the legislators, but with people across the state. The bills backed by developers were defeated, and instead, new laws were passed strengthening homeowners' rights and increasing homeowner association transparency. As I sit here now, 5 years after building that first tall fence, I'm amazed at how far we've come. The Community First Coalition has helped transform hundreds of neighborhoods. We've seen communities go from battlegrounds of petty rules enforcement to thriving, collaborative spaces where individuality is celebrated and neighbors look out for each other. Sarah's garden has become a local landmark. People come from all over to see her beautiful flowers and vegetable patches. She's even started a seed exchange program, encouraging biodiversity and helping other gardeners get started. As for me, I'm still in my house at Sunnyside Estates. The fence is still there, though now it's almost completely covered in flowering vines. It's no longer a barrier, but a living reminder of how a small act of defiance can grow into something beautiful. I've learned that true community isn't about enforcing uniformity or maintaining a certain image. It's about bringing people together, celebrating our differences, and working towards common goals. It's about being good neighbors in the truest sense of the word. Sometimes, when I'm sitting in my backyard, enjoying the scent of Sarah's flowers wafting over the fence, I think about Cynthia and the old homeowner association board. I wonder if they ever realized what they were missing by trying to control every aspect of our lives. I hope that wherever they are now, they've learned the value of letting a community grow naturally, like a garden. Because that's what we've created here, a garden of a community. It may not be as manicured as Cynthia would have liked, but it's vibrant, diverse, and very much alive. And to me, that's more beautiful than any perfectly trimmed lawn could ever be. As I look towards the future, I'm excited to see how our movement will continue to grow and evolve. We're already working on new initiatives, like helping communities set up tool-sharing programs and organizing inter-neighborhood events to build connections on a larger scale. But no matter how big our coalition becomes, I'll never forget where it all started, with a 10-foot fence and a determination to save a neighbor's garden from homeowner association overreach. As our movement continued to grow, we faced new challenges and opportunities. One day, about 6 years after our initial stand against Cynthia, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from a producer at a national news network. "We've been following your Community First Coalition," she said, "and we'd like to do a feature story on your work. We think it could inspire people across the country who are dealing with similar issues." I was stunned. Our work had always been grassroots, focused on helping one community at a time. The idea of national exposure was both exciting and a little daunting. After consulting with Sarah and the rest of our core team, we agreed to participate. The resulting news segment was more impactful than we could have imagined. It aired during prime time, showcasing the before and after stories of several communities we'd helped. The segment featured interviews with homeowners who had regained control of their neighborhoods, as well as footage of community events and collaborative projects that had sprung up in the wake of homeowner association reform. But the most powerful moment came when they showed Sarah's garden. The camera panned over the riot of colors and textures, the bees buzzing among the flowers, the lush vegetable beds. Then it cut to archival footage of Sarah, years earlier, tearfully describing how she'd almost given up her passion due to homeowner association harassment. The contrast was stark and emotional. It perfectly encapsulated what our movement was all about, protecting individual expression while fostering a sense of community. The response to the segment was overwhelming. Our website crashed from the surge in traffic. We received thousands of emails and calls from people all over the country, sharing their own homeowner association horror stories and asking for help. It was clear that we needed to scale up our efforts. With the help of some generous donors who had seen the news segment, we were able to establish a proper nonprofit organization. We hired staff, developed more comprehensive training programs, and created a network of volunteer legal advisors to help communities navigate the often complex process of homeowner association reform. As our influence grew, we began to see changes on a larger scale. Some cities and counties started to re-examine their relationships with homeowner associations, implementing oversight measures to prevent abuse. A few forward-thinking real estate developers even reached out to us for advice on creating more community-friendly homeowner association structures for their new developments. But with greater visibility came greater opposition. A National Association of Homeowner Association Management Companies launched a PR campaign against us, claiming that our efforts would lead to declining property values and neighborhood chaos. They painted a picture of unkempt lawns, garish house colors, and junk-filled yards if homeowner association powers were curtailed. We knew we had to counter these claims with hard data. We partnered with urban planning researchers from several universities to conduct a comprehensive study of communities before and after homeowner association reform. The results were clear. Neighborhoods that had implemented our community-first approach showed increased property values, higher resident satisfaction, and even lower crime rates compared to those with traditional, restrictive homeowner associations. Armed with this data, we took our message to Washington, D.C. We testified before congressional committees, advocating for federal legislation to protect homeowners' rights and limit homeowner association overreach. It was a long, slow process, but gradually, we began to see progress. One of the most satisfying moments came when we were invited to consult on a new federal housing initiative. The program aimed to create mixed-income communities with a focus on sustainability and community engagement. They wanted our input on how to structure the community governance to avoid the pitfalls of traditional homeowner associations while still maintaining neighborhood standards. As we worked on this project, I couldn't help but think back to where it all began. I remember the day I decided to build that fence, more out of frustration and a desire to tweak Cynthia's nose than any grand vision of community reform. I thought about Sarah, tending her garden with quiet determination despite years of harassment. I recalled the first community meeting where we stood up to the homeowner association board, nervous but united. We had come so far from those early days. What started as a neighborhood dispute had grown into a national movement, changing lives and communities across the country. Yet, at its heart, our mission remained the same: to empower people to create the kind of neighborhoods they want to live in, where individuality is respected and community is cherished. As the years passed, our movement continued to evolve. We started to see second-generation effects in the communities we'd helped. Children who had grown up in these reformed neighborhoods were now becoming homeowners themselves, bringing with them a different perspective on community and governance. One day, I received an email that brought this home in a powerful way. It was from a young woman named Amelia, who had just bought her first house in a community not far from Sunnyside Estates. "I grew up in Oak Grove," she wrote, "one of the first neighborhoods your coalition helped. I was just a kid then, but I remember how things changed. Before, we were hardly allowed to play outside because the homeowner association had so many rules about noise and appropriate activities. After the reform, our street came alive. We had block parties, community gardens, a neighborhood watch program run by people who actually cared about each other." Amelia went on to explain that this experience had shaped her view of what a community should be. When she and her partner were house hunting, they specifically looked for a neighborhood with a community-first approach to governance. "I wanted my future children to have the same kind of childhood I had after our homeowner association changed," she wrote. "I wanted to live somewhere that values people over rules, where neighbors look out for each other and everyone has a voice." Reading Amelia's email, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. We hadn't just changed rules or governance structures, we had shifted mindsets and expectations for an entire generation. As I sit here now, nearly 2 decades after that first confrontation with Cynthia, I'm filled with a sense of wonder at how far we've come. The 10-foot fence in my backyard is still standing, though it's now almost entirely obscured by the lush growth of flowering vines and climbing roses that Sarah and I have nurtured over the years. Sarah, now in her 80s, is still gardening, though she's slowed down a bit. Her garden has become a community project, with neighbors of all ages coming to help tend the plants and learn from her vast knowledge. It's a living legacy, a testament to the power of perseverance and the beauty that can flourish when people are free to express themselves. Our Community First Coalition continues its work, though much of the day-to-day operations are now handled by a younger generation of activists. They bring new energy and ideas, adapting our methods to address emerging challenges like climate change and the housing affordability crisis. As for me, I'm content to serve as an advisor and occasional speaker. I still live in my house at Sunnyside Estates, enjoying the vibrant community we've built here. Sometimes, I sit in my backyard, listening to the buzz of bees in Sarah's garden, and the laughter of children playing freely in their yards, and I marvel at the change a simple fence can bring. The story of our fight against homeowner association overreach has become something of a local legend. Parents tell their children about the garden that was almost lost, and the community that came together to save it. It's a reminder that change is possible, that ordinary people can stand up to injustice and make a difference. As I look to the future, I'm filled with hope. The seeds we planted here in Sunnyside Estates have grown into a movement that's changing communities across the nation. And like Sarah's garden, I believe it will continue to grow and thrive for generations to come. In the end, our story is about more than just homeowner associations or gardening or property rights. It's about the power of community, the importance of standing up for what's right, and the beautiful things that can happen when we work together to create the world we want to live in. And it all started with a fence, a barrier that became a bridge, a simple structure that sparked a revolution in how we think about home, community, and the power of good neighbors. And guys, with this we have reached the end of the video. If you enjoyed this epic neighbor showdown, please smash that like button, comment with some house emojis to show your support, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thanks a lot, and I will see you again tomorrow with another amazing story.